Good morning to most, good afternoon to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, a limited run show we're doing where Deep State Kuba gives you updates on the geopolitical situation as we all prepare for World War III. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, thank you so much for joining us. If you are a new listener, thank you for taking the time to check this out. Please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a very long way in promoting the channel. This is not the only show we'll be doing today. I know we usually don't do two shows on Mondays, but we had to make an exception for the following show. We'll be speaking with California gubernatorial candidate Butch Ware as he challenges a bipartisan consensus in Silicon Valley capital in his run for office. We'll be speaking with Butch at about 12 p.m. Pacific time, so in about 6 hours from now. Now, if you do enjoy all the diverse programming we provide here on TIR, and you would like to join us for our raucous champagne rooms and movie nights, which we're having another movie night this week. We'll be watching Red Dawn Tuesday with Bill Cody, who's in the movie. Well, become a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber. For as little as $3 a month or a one-time payment of $30 for the year, your small donation goes a long way in making sure that TIR can continue to stay on the air. Speaking of air, according to CNN, President Donald Trump said Sunday that Iran has agreed to most of the 15-point list of demands that the U.S. conveyed via Pakistan to end the war. Asked whether Iran responded to those points, the president told reporters aboard Air Force One, "They gave us most of the points. Why wouldn't they? They're agreeing with us on the plan. We asked 15 things, and for the most part, we're going to be asking for a couple of other things," Trump continued. Tehran did not immediately accept the 15-point plan last week. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has previously acknowledged that messages have been exchanged through intermediaries, but signaled skepticism of Washington's position. Trump also said Iran has given the U.S. oil that will be shipped tomorrow to prove they're serious. Trump said when he talked last week about Iran giving the U.S. a present, it was 10 massive boatloads of oil. And today they gave us another present. They gave us 20 boatloads of oil. It starts being shipped tomorrow. We're having very good meetings, both directly and indirectly, and I think we're getting a lot of very important points, Trump continued. Now, before I bring in Kuba, don't you guys forget that when we have questions about some of the things that he'll be saying, just put those questions in the chat and we will get to as many as possible. Now, coming on live from a secret bunker somewhere buried deep, deep, deep within the new Death Star, please welcome Deep State Kuba.
Hello, everyone. This is the children's section of the Death Star. You can tell by the colorful murals. We've got Miss Rachel down a deck below me doing agitprop for the IRGC.
I was going to say it's going to be like a Empire version of Miss Rachel. It's a little different.
Miss Rachel droid. It's C-3PO in a wig.
Kuba, Donald Trump says Iran is giving him oil presents. How realistic is the oil presents?
So, is oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz? Yes, it is, because Iran has been very clear about its terms. The strait is not blockaded. The strait is open for countries that it considers to be friendly, assuming that they request authorization and they pay what is reported to be a $2 million toll for passage. And that's in addition to whatever profits Iran is collecting from its own oil exports, which the bulk of the movements consist of Iranian oil moving with Iranian approval to customers in Pakistan, India, China, mostly Asian. And Trump is treating this regular traffic that's economically beneficial to Iran, that aligns completely with their strategic interests and benefits their war effort, as some kind of concession to them. And this is simply just another part of his regular campaign of deceit and misinformation in order to try to calm markets and reassure the American people that this is not going to be some kind of long conflict, that the end is in sight. But we've seen escalating strikes against Iranian targets. Um, Recently, Israel and the United States have hit industrial targets, steel plants. Steel is the second main export uh, that Iran um, that Iran collects major revenue on, as well as Iranian universities. So what we're seeing in terms of action and behavior is escalation. We have the arrival of ground troops, including the USS Tripoli and the 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit in the CENTCOM area of operations. They haven't specified the exact location. It could be as far away as Diego Garcia. It's probably Diego Garcia, but it is that those reinforcements have arrived. So there's no indication operationally that there's any kind of movement towards a ceasefire or towards de-escalation. Quite the contrary, all the signs are escalatory, including the entry of the Houthis into this conflict. Right now, they've limited themselves to missile attacks against Israel, but this creates not only a new player in the constellation of forces, but potentially a new blockade. They've historically demonstrated that they can block the Bab al Mandab outlet of the Red Sea. They can target shipping along the Red Sea trade routes. Also, potentially, another ground front. They could move not just against um, forces in the southern part of Yemen, which is occupied by a mishmash, uneasy alliance of different groups sponsored by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but they could also move into Saudi Arabia proper. There have been border clashes in the past. Generally speaking, the Houthis have gotten the better of it. Um, and I believe that we've seen a step back from some of the tough talking and threats issued by the UAE and Saudi Arabia that they might potentially enter the conflict on the American side to retaliate for strikes on targets in their own territory, partly because they have to, Saudi Arabia certainly has to reckon with the possibility that the Houthis may move against them in some of the more restive regions and some of the more difficult terrain of southwestern Saudi Arabia. That's a major issue. Also, one topic that we haven't adequately covered before is the ongoing Israeli campaign in Lebanon against Hezbollah. That conflict is incredibly destructive and has involved a major mobilization of Israeli forces, hundreds of thousands of troops, with uh, potentially another mobilization of reservists, up to another 400,000 troops, in order to support the effort, because it is not going as entirely as planned. Um, it's clear that Hezbollah, despite the pager attacks, despite the assassination of leadership figures like Hassan Nasrallah, um, that it is not a spent force, and it has learned from previous conflicts and even adapted some of the tactics and technique that the Ukrainians have um, pioneered in the fight against the Russian invasion over there. We've seen footage from first person drones, and they appear to be striking convoys of Israeli troops moving in, including the formidable Merkava tanks. I've seen reports. It's very difficult to assess in this information environment the noise from the signal, to what extent figures are exaggerated, to what extent they're accurate. But 20 tanks and the IDF, despite what we've seen in Gaza, where they're really fighting a very one sided war against a strictly limited and isolated population, the IDF is not a sizable army in absolute terms. So the destruction of 20 expensive, difficult to replace um, armored units at the exact same time that there's contested airspace, that logistics and resupply are being stressed by the continuing campaign, the rocket and air campaign by Iran, Hezbollah, and now the Houthis. These losses are significant. That said, their strategic goal of expelling the population, the entire Lebanese population, um, living south of the Litani River, forcing them into central Lebanon, that appears to be successful. They've already razed border villages, and their willingness to target medics, journalists, aid workers, um, civilians. Christian priest was killed in the initial stages of the incursion into southern Lebanon. All of this creates the type of panic and fear in the civilian population that as is pushing them further and further north. That, of course, complicates the political reality of Lebanon even more. This is a poor, heavily stressed country that is constantly experiencing security and political crises, and now largely Shia population with strong connections to Hezbollah is being pushed into central Lebanon, where there's a much more demographically, especially mixed Lebanese population and groups that are very hostile to Hezbollah for political and security reasons. Right? There's grudges that run deep. Lebanon is not a unified society. It's not a situation where you have very strong identification with the anti-IDF resistance. There are pro-Israel or at least anti-Hezbollah Lebanese, not just individuals, but entire political forces. So the movement of over 1 million Shia Lebanese from the south into the center is going to compound that division and create further destabilization. There's also new developments in Iraq and Syria. In Iraq, the popular mobilization forces, the Shia militia that were raised to by Qasem Soleimani, and well, largely, with the close collaboration with local Shia leaders to fight ISIS originally. They've been normalized and integrated as paramilitaries. There was an American ceasefire to permit the evacuation of troops. At the end of that ceasefire, the United States attacked, killing the leader of a major PMF militia. Right now, the anti-American sentiment in Iraq is amplifying significantly. By that, I mean, of course, the Arab central and southern Iraq, Kurdistan, the Kurdistan regional government, is in a very challenging situation because they have strong links to both the United States and to Israel as a result of their longtime opposition to Saddam Hussein, their challenging position with respect to not only their own federal government, but the Islamic Republic of Iran and Turkey, right? The bane of Kurdish nationalist groups everywhere. They saw the West and Israel as a balancing force, but now those relationships create targets for the IRGC, targets for the PMF militias inside of Kurdistan, and it's a very challenging political environment to maneuver. If you support this conflict, then you're exposing yourself not just to further escalatory retaliation by the Iranians, but also potentially Turkish intervention, which is what doomed Rojava and its experience of autonomy. So, but the central Arab areas of Iraq, those are moving more in the direction of it appears that the federal government, at the very least, is willing to unleash and tolerate PMF mobilization against U.S. targets, strikes against U.S. targets. It appears that this might also include cross-border attacks against the new government of Syria. The government of Syria, post-Assad, based in the al-Nusra Front, based in the various sort of post-Al-Qaeda configurations. Al-Jolani, I believe, the current leader, who was um, hosted in the White House and has had a very hands-off um, relationship of mutual tolerance, if not cooperation, with Israel, even as Israel has steadily encroached further and further into Syrian territory. Uh, he's seen as a uh, unfriendly figure by the IRGC and by many of the Shia groups inside of Iraq, certainly by Hezbollah as well. They would like to reopen the ground bridge to connect the Lebanese front to the Iranian center. And there have been drone strikes recorded today of Syrian bases and Syrian positions coming from the Iraqi side, Iraqi based drones striking into Syria. Finally, I wanted to flag Bahrain. A couple of days ago, a young Shia man, the Mohammed Al Musawi, 32 years old, who had been taken into custody for security reasons by the royal government, died in custody, allegedly from torture. You know, they tortured to death this young man who was brought in for political reasons, and that triggered a wave of significant protests against the government. Bahrain is majority Shia. There's significant ties between Bahrain and Iran. During the Arab Spring, the royal government barely held on and only survived a major uprising thanks to the intervention of Saudi troops that crossed the causeway linking the island of Bahrain with the Saudi mainland. Now, of course, that type of action would not be possible. Troops moving along the causeway would be sitting ducks for Iranian drones or rockets. The situation appears to be escalating as the government of Bahrain recently announced a curfew for maritime activity uh, from dusk till dawn. No ships are allowed to enter Bahrain or operate around Bahraini waters, which signals to me that they're anxious about Iranian infiltration or amphibious maneuvers against them, possibly also smuggling weapons, moving people in and out, that kind of thing. Uh, and frankly, if you're Iran, why wouldn't you? Bahrain seems like the most likely of the GCC countries to fall. It has the shakiest government with the least connection to its people, the most oppositional relationship. People remember the repression, which was quite ruthless and bloody, that came after the Arab Spring uprisings. And um, it would be a symbolically heady scalp for the Iranians to take a GCC monarchy undone because of their longstanding anti-Iranian, pro-American security posture.
With the United States'
Yes,
relationship
the
with
Bahraini royal family is Sunni. Fizzle, fizzle.
can the U.S. ever decouple any of their relationship with Israel at this point? Because it feels like that that might need to happen sooner than later. Because it sounds like the way you're describing the Lebanon situation, they're just about destroying uh, an entire population of people.
Well, we've already seen that the both parties in the U.S. are willing to stomach and even support the destruction of an entire population in Gaza by the
Mm.
Israelis. And the connections between the United States and Israel are very difficult to disentangle because it's more than an economic relationship or security partnership, but within the most significant, most powerful elite networks, supporters of Israel, many dual nationals, some straight up Israeli citizens, people who just work for the IDF um, are deeply integrated personally. If you consider something like the Atlantic, um, forgive me if I've used this example before, but Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor in chief, was a former IDF prison guard. There's many people in significant positions that have those kinds of connections with the Israeli state security apparatus. And as somebody once pointed out, there's no such thing as an ex KGB officer or an ex CIA officer. An IDF, someone who has served in the IDF, those connections and relationships, they're lifelong. And I don't there's nothing nefarious in that if you talk to a United States Marine or serviceman in most countries, right? Like that's a very significant and formative experience. They have very intense relationships with people um, who they've encountered and served with during that time period. Of course, they're going to care. Of course, they're going to maintain those connections. Um, but it makes that personal element makes disentangling from Israel much more complicated. The and of course we can't lose sight of the money element as well. Unlike Canadian or NATO relationships, which in theory should be even deeper, um, there's an alignment of pro-Israel billionaires, people like the Adelsons, Larry Ellison and his son Barry, who then empower people like Barry Weiss on the media side. These are significant forces in American politics that transcend party identification. What we've seen recently is perhaps an over identification of the Israeli side with Republican interests. That's something that Netanyahu really is responsible for. Before that, it was a much more two-sided hedging strategy and much less maximalist goals coming out of Israel. Um, Younger people may not recall, but I was around to see Yitzhak Rabin shake hands with Yasser Arafat, and there was genuine hope that the Oslo Accords would lead to a two-state solution, that some kind of humane outcome to the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank might be possible, some kind of living arrangement where that the land of Israel and Palestine is shared between these communities on an acceptable level. We've seen resolutions to apartheid in South Africa or to the troubles in Northern Ireland. It's not entirely fanciful to imagine such a future, at least in the heady days of the 90s. But Netanyahu, in a way that really makes him a sort of world historical force, destroyed that entire process and reoriented Israeli politics into what we see today. Um, I think that one step that's going to be necessary to rebalance the relationship between Israel and the United States is his removal from the board. Uh, there's a serious anti corruption trial against him in Israel. Arguably, he may have engaged in um, this type of extremely aggressive war first foreign policy in order to try to save himself from that trial. And the evidence against him is quite damning. And there's recently something like 1,000 hours of interrogation footage from the Israeli investigation into him leaked, deeply compromising for Netanyahu. Um, that unfortunately, the because of the way that he has reshaped and reconfigured Israeli society, the opposition is not much better. I mean, Neftali Bennett most recently, um, made headlines by suggesting that Turkey was going to be the next
Yeah.
target for Israeli security efforts. That's the next leader that needs to fall, Erdogan. That's not necessarily a heartening step. Um, what we'll also probably need is generational turnover in political leadership in the United States. After all, the relationship, this dangerous codependency with Israel, is not just endorsed by figures like Trump, but also by Chuck Schumer, right? The leadership of the Democratic Party is also heavily tilted towards giving Israel a carte blanche to pursue ruthlessly, brutally its security interests, up to and including the genocide of the people of Gaza.
But is
So,
this, but has
mhm.
this been just really bad from an optic level and a support level, where both parties now can literally point to Israel and say, "You're the reason why we don't win elections." If the Democratic Party can point to it and say, "This is the reason why Kamala didn't win, despite her not having a full even year to run," and now with the midterms coming up, Republicans can point to Israel as well, because a lot of people that aren't politicos feel that Israel bullied the Trump administration or coerced the Trump administration into this conflict now with Iran in their kind of program of eradicating the the people that they don't like.
Yeah, I think that what we're going to see is a bifurcation of at least of both parties into sort of four political tendencies inside the United States, which and that results of that are going to be unknown. But there's going to be a pro and anti-Israel factions of both the MAGA right and the progressive left, and that Cenk Tucker bromance is the extreme case where just on that single issue, you might have rapprochement across that political divide. Um, Certainly, we've seen some talking points cross-pollinating. Um, I saw a picture from No King's protest where somebody was wearing a Goyim Lives Matter hat, right? The
Okay.
I Yeah, it's that I'm fully on board with the progressive Hassan Piker take that criticism of Israel, even ideological anti-Zionism, isn't necessarily anti-Semitic, but maybe don't buy the merch, right? Like maybe if next to that cool based um, Goyim Lives Matter hat, there's swastika armband and a Sonoran t-shirt, right? Maybe
It
leave that merch
feels
alone.
that's does it feel like that's the, I don't want to say saving grace, but that's the thing that kind of keeps some people with a modicum of support for Israel, is that there is a feeling of anti-Semitism behind. It's kind of like Obama. Like, you can really hate his policies, but sometimes you talk to someone, it's like, you don't hate his policies, you just hate the N word.
Yeah, the um, it's definitely. Uh, I think that this benefits um, supporters of Israel largely by um, diluting the ability for the anti-Israeli side to effectively coordinate, because there really is an element that's beyond the pale that is straight up anti-Semitic and should be avoided as um, intensely as possible, right? Um, the key is to take that absolutely justified revulsion and prevent it from going into um, territory that then justifies Israeli politics, the Israeli approach to Lebanon and Gaza, and this entire Iran war. Right? The um, those are very legitimate points of criticism. But yeah, we shouldn't allow outright anti-Semites to make them toxic. But similarly, the fact that you might hear based takes from Groiper 44, you know, on your Twitter feed, maybe avoid that guy anyway.
Boots are positioned on the ground. Do you think this talk of Trump and the boatloads of oil is a way to walk back the threat? Because now maybe people are in his ear telling him that this is not going to go well, and 2,000 troops they're going to get slaughtered, and it's going to look horrible for you when with 2,000 body bags coming back to the States.
Well, consider how challenging the information environment is for us, even for somebody as obsessive as me. I'm seeing persuasive takes about dramatic developments, which I'm inclined to believe because they make sense within my framework. And then as I dig a little deeper, it's like, oh no, this is just misinformation. Then again, there's also dramatic developments that are denied by one side or another, and then are proven to be absolutely justified. And then there's legitimate points of confusion. Iran announced that it had struck Bubiyan Island in Kuwait. It had there were casualties in the 82nd Airborne and a number of landing craft. Turns out that that story is mostly correct, except it wasn't the 82nd Airborne. It was a unit of U.S. Marines. So if this is what it's like trying to figure out what's going on when you have access to the full panoply of open source intelligence, and you um, try to minimize the impact of your ideological blinders. Trump is lazy. Trump doesn't seek out countering information. He doesn't try to red team his assumptions. He is eager to take solace in fanciful interpretations that flatter his worldview and seem to confirm his decisions. And he's surrounded by people who understand that information filtration is one of the ways that they maintain their position in the system, one of their ways they're able to influence policy. So I don't know if people are telling him that it's going to be a disaster. I don't know if that's getting through to him. I think that he probably jumps from a delusion that there's going to be an easy deal that he can quickly make to a delusion that decisive action will be relatively low cost and quickly resolve the issue. After all, what evidence is there that he's even able to absorb challenging, complicated, difficult information over on an issue which sticks around long enough to become boring in his brain? The fact that he let through a tanker of Russian oil to Cuba today,
Yeah.
that strikes me as a sign that intensification is on the horizon, that we're going to be moving to a more serious boots on the ground posture against Iran, because he loved the idea that Cuba was next. He cherished the suffering he was inflicting on the people of that island. So if he's letting that go, that means that he just doesn't have the resources, just doesn't have the wherewithal to maintain the blockade while doing what's necessary in the Gulf.
Does it feel like that he's even in trying to posture himself with the big boys that he wants to be shoulder to shoulder with, the Netanyahus and the Putins of the world? Does it feel like that he has to take on a certain dictatorial posture, maybe even one that he doesn't necessarily believe in totally? Like the whole Cuba thing. Maybe I'll take it, maybe I'll free it. I don't really know. Um, I understand he's a businessman and he's almost a caricature of what a businessman sounded like in 1955. Uh, it feels to me like he would literally try to nuke Cuba just to be like, well, now I'm more badass than Netanyahu.
I certainly think that he does not. You can see in the relative treatment that he dishes out to established long-term NATO partners, democratic leaders, versus the way that he fawns over Putin, Kim Jong Un, the respectful attitude that he has towards Xi Jinping, that he identifies much more with autocratic leadership than with the um, constitutional, democratic forms of government that really should be the most natural reflection of the American system and American values, right, as publicly professed. Um, I think that we've seen with things like his um, military parade, the gold coins that are going to be issued with his likeness, the fact that his signature is going to
Signature.
appear on the $1 bill, his obsession with um, reconfiguring the architecture of Washington, D.C., building the ballroom, that there's a kind of Turkmenbashi monumentalism to his ego that is possibly the most that he gets out of being president. He really adores these gestures, naming things after himself, or breaking psychologically uh, people around him to the point where they're proposing to name things after him. Um, this is not behavior of a constitutional leader, and I I think that perhaps there's a certain attraction to um, being, the first post World War II president to use nuclear weapons, the first leader after that World War II to go that far. He likes being first. He likes feeling that he's in the history books. The whole obsession about the Nobel Peace Prize, for instance.
Mhm.
Um, all of these elements to his psychology make him extraordinarily dangerous because he's chasing those kinds of highs. The um, and I think that perhaps the current equilibrium where people have been trying to placate him with things like the FIFA International Peace Prize, right? That there's been gestures to name things after him. Um, I believe there's not one but two Trump International airports in Florida. This whole thing with the coins and the money, it's enough to keep him going, right? But never enough to satisfy him. And just as with the escalatory logic of the Iran war, it's going to produce an escalatory logic in his reach for more and more authoritarian displays. I think that our saving grace is that he's really bad at this. I was worried about Project 2025 because it indicated that there was some bureaucratic thinking, some systems understanding at work here, maybe even more so than on the Democratic side, about how the US state apparatus actually functions and how to reconfigure it in a MAGA direction. But it feels like that project has been abandoned halfway through. There are many crucial posts in the US government that remain empty, entire offices that were doged to death, and no real replacements have been stood up. Now, as much as it may seem liberatory not to have um, bureaucrats and experts telling you can't do things. But this does mean that when there's a technical issue or an important implementation matter that on which the success of the whole MAGA program relies, there's nobody to carry it out, right? In the Gulf, they have a similar problem with a top-heavy royal family and a whole bunch of ministers that are responsible for making decisions, but then no one actually implementing things. Creates amazing opportunities for McKinsey and other consultancies to swoop in and take care of that or promise to. But it also means that um, uh, there's a cabinet level position in one of the GCC states, which is just the minister of follow up, right? Like he's the person who is supposed to actually see to it that decisions made in the office are implemented on the ground. And I think that there's a shortage of those people in the Trump administration. Marco Rubio seems to have taken on that role by default, but um, people I know that have insights into the current State Department tell me that there's shortage of staff and that Rubio is actually pretty lazy about anything that isn't Cuba or Latin America related. He'll just
Hmm.
go in front of TV and say what he's supposed to, but um, he actually is more than willing to let things fall through the cracks. Vance also has a reputation for being capable, but he's read the room correctly and knows that being associated too tightly with this conflict is absolute kryptonite for any chance at becoming president after Trump.
Hegseth doesn't seem to care. Um, Kuba, do you think the Republican machine will allow Trump to pass, or will they puppet his corpse and AI him a la Equilibrium? It's from Dizzle.
That's the thing. If something were to happen to Trump, I don't think that the people around him have the discipline or the capacity to hide how brutally and ruthlessly they're competing against one another. Somebody's going to spill because they'll need to cut somebody else off from winning the game and becoming the successor. I think that um, Trump, his passing will, you know, they managed to physically get Biden through his term. They can probably do the same for Trump. There's an entire pharmaceutical industry that can be tapped to keep the body going, to keep the essential functions operating just long enough so that regular processes can kick in. After all, the only thing worse than um, losing Trump as a vector for power is losing out to a rival in the post-Trump vacuum. So I don't think they can puppet him, but I think that they can just keep him going.
Shy Poo Bunny says, just a thought experiment, Cuba. In what world does the U.S. military alone open up and it's quotation marks, open up the Strait of Hormuz and secure it long term with the current capabilities of the U.S. military?
Okay, assuming that the most immediate ways that I can think of would involve um, bribing Iranian military figure to defect. The problem is that the Israelis have knocked out so much of the top leadership that we have this mosaic defense strategy where you no longer have a single commander that might be able to um, unify enough of the military in a way that um, allows him to countermand orders from Khamenei and from um, the uh, the previous strategy. So that would be hard. Um, if you are going to defeat the Iranians, maybe some kind of unconventional weapon. Um, let's say you're not going to use nuclear weapons, but nie jest całkiem, jest okej. Jeszcze 10 minut. Spokojnie, tak, proszę.
It's like the end of the Spy movie, and you find out that Kuba was a double agent the whole time.
Exactly. The anyway, now that my um, now that my controller has given the nod for me to told me what I can and can't say, my handler, I think that um, you some sort of unconventional weapon, maybe some kind of biological um, weapon. You know, the only thing missing in this context is a plague, right? Something that wipes out um, hundreds of thousands, right? Millions at a time. Something that can get into the underground rocket cities, the underground drone factories, and eliminate um, the essential staff that prevent them from operating. This would be difficult, but not impossible. Indeed, if you were going to go after these underground facilities, that might be the weak link, right? Ventilation, air circulation. You could use might not need to be a biological agent. Uh, there was a hostage situation in Russia uh, during the Chechen insurgency when the Russians used a very powerful opiate gas to immobilize the hostages and the hostage takers before they went in. Of course, this resulted in a very high level of casualties among the hostages, but you know we're not talking about a situation where you care about that. So maybe that's what the special forces are for, to go in, find the air intakes, find the circulation systems for these underground facilities, and wipe them out that way. Um, Using conventional forces alone, right? As soon as you open up a topographical map of Iran, it's uh, it's absolutely devastating, right? The terrain is highly defensible, extremely challenging for the use of air power or for any offensive maneuver, right? Everyone is constantly being channeled through valleys. So rockets, drones are going to be extraordinarily lethal. Um, yeah, I think that you would need to reach for some kind of unconventional warfare, something that either is totally outlawed as prima facie a crime against humanity or something that we haven't seen before. I don't know, like maybe MK Ultra has a secret spin-off and they're going to mind control um, Khamenei to accept these terms, but it's difficult to see how um, even a fully mobilized U.S. military, and one of the strong indicators that this is going to be unsuccessful is that Trump didn't bother to fully mobilize the military before this adventure began. Um, Even fully mobilized, I don't know how you can defeat a unified and um, resilient IRGC.
Question for Kuba: do the groups that Iran sponsors have the capability to start a campaign on U.S. soil?
Well, there was uh, last week a serious panic about drones flying over Barksdale Air Force Base. The base defense was apparently unable, or for some reasons, maybe having to do with the orders they received, maybe for technical reasons, maybe it's a troop safety issue. Can't use countermeasures because they might impact civil aviation or something, like the laser that Border Patrol used against the Quinceanera balloon that shut
Mhm.
down air traffic along the U.S.-Mexico border. But for whatever reason, a significant number of drones, I believe it was at least 15, were loitering over Barksdale Air Force Base, stayed there. It's unclear what they did. Maybe they were just collecting data for reconnaissance. Maybe it was an implicit threat, a demonstration of capability, and then they just pieced out. There's been no follow up. I don't know what who was operating them. I can't give any more insight, but I do know that many people who follow domestic security seriously were very alarmed by this development. That suggests that there's a domestic capability in inside the United States. Um, the On a previous What Fresh Hell with Bob, we talked about the refinery fire in Texas.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, you guys made the very persuasive case that this was just incompetence. This happens every spring. That this is what happens in Texas, where you have low standards for labor, low standards for safety requirements. You get every once in a while a refinery blows up, and that's certainly true, right? Um, the There was the major train derailment. I want to say in Palestine, Pennsylvania.
Palestine, yeah.
Um,
Yep.
yeah,
There's still problems from that. Yeah.
exactly. So the U.S. Industrial base is not secure in the sense that these things happen by accident. So how hard would it be to do it on purpose and make it look like an accident, right? Um, there's a massive population of Iranian Americans, most of whom, because of the circumstances of their immigration, are actually anti-Islamic Republic. But you can recruit sympathizers, you can threaten people's families at home. Um, then there's the anti-Israel, um, pro-Palestine mobilization. For instance, in Europe, in the Czech Republic, there were a number of fires at uh, defense sites, at um, defense industry sites, factories, warehouses that were linked to a group whose express purpose, they were anarcho-leftists um, that were against European support for Israel. And in their statements, they characterized their actions as being anti-genocide. But the factories in question had only tenuous relations with Israel and mostly produced drones for Ukraine. So this was taken to indicate that these were either useful idiots or Russian cutouts, right? Made no difference for Netanyahu that these factories were offline, but it did make a big difference for Zelensky. So there's all kinds of vectors for Iranian infiltration and Iranian covert ops, sabotage of all kinds. The fact that DHS has been gutted, it's been defunded. Groups that were specializing in um, anti-terrorism with an Iranian specialization were recently fired by Kash Patel. Kash Patel, whose entire internet history was hacked by
Yeah.
Iranians, right? All of this suggests that the capacity for domestic surveillance, domestic counterintelligence operations, and counterterrorism operations is severely compromised. I'd be quite concerned.
Did you see that they're getting rid of all these people's CDL licenses too?
No, tell me more.
Apparently, the new genius plot is to get all the illegals out of the truck driving industry. So
Mm, yeah.
I'll shoot you that article in our group chat. But yeah,
I There were a couple of high profile accidents, and you know commercial truck driving accidents happen all the time.
Mhm.
It's a giant, dangerous machine that's hurtling across highways with other people, other users, metal accelerated, right? Tons and tons of it. Things are going to break down, right? Especially since all of the logistics companies operate with very thin margins and there's so much pressure for profit taking. Um, so of course you're going to have accidents. You find the ones where the driver was an immigrant, and then you're off to the races. This is also a jobs program, right? Like um, native-born truck drivers, or it's good blue-collar work, and this makes it seem like you can take away immigrant incomes and give them to
Can I
what
read?
is it, heritage Americans?
Can I read you this? Based on reports from March
Please.
2026, the Trump administration has finalized a rule taking effect on March 16th. It's the 30th today, 2026,
Mhm.
that will prevent an estimated 200,000 foreign-born truck drivers who are in the U.S. legally, such as asylum seekers and DACA recipients, from renewing their non-domiciled commercial driver's licenses. The new rule is called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration Rule.
I'd also be curious about how CUMSA negotiations are going, because CUSMA, the because there are extensive provisions in the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement about mutual recognition of uh, truck drivers' licenses, operation by logistics companies across the border. In previous age, I could imagine all of those foreign-born um, drivers operating in the U.S. being replaced by drivers from Mexican companies.
Mm.
But now, I'm assuming that there'll just be more accidents and more inflation.
I mean, as a person that's been hit multiple times by drivers here, please don't do that.
Now, I'm getting the signal from my handler that it's time to execute some Ewoks and to get going. So you're on this side.
Thank you very much, Kuba, and have a very good rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care,
Peace,
everyone.
brother. That's Deep State Kuba. Now, I will be back in 5 hours to speak with gubernatorial candidate in the Golden State of California, Butch Ware, who's running on the Green Party ticket. We're going to talk about his run for office. So, all that being said, if you have any more questions for Kuba, definitely leave them in the chat or in the comments, because he actually does respond to people. But one favor, can you please keep the mini dissertations down to like 2 or 3 sentences? Some of those things are just, it's like, come on, man. That's a report. That's a whole report. You could have gotten your question out without that report that you wrote. But on that note, thank you guys very much. And I am out.